Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. This is a program about what happens when you take not the straight and narrow path, but the interesting twists and turns in life. And we've got an interesting twist and turn uh, for today's program. Our guest is Chuck Crooks. Now, I kind of know Chuck from a past association. I used to live in Bellingham, Washington, and that's where he's at now, and he runs something called Bellingham Ghost Tours. So I thought it might be kind of interesting to have him come on and talk to us about some of his experiences. He considers himself a psychic medium, and just have him talk a little bit about that. Thanks for being on with
Yeah,
us,
thank
Chuck.
you for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Sure. What's going on in Bellingham? How's the weather today?
It's a little bit cloudy today, so kind of wishing for a little more sunshine, actually.
Yeah, well, I've come to believe that when you live in Washington State, sunshine is not something you see a whole lot of. So that's okay. Tell us a little bit about Chuck. How did you discover that you were a psychic or a psychic medium?
I would say for me, it was kind of a slow burn. I didn't really have any sort of aha moment that really kind of awakened me or anything like that. It's something I've always had an interest in. Like growing up, I always watched the ghost shows, all that kind of stuff. But then in high school, we had a ghost cat in our house, and I
Hmm.
was the only one that seemed to experience that. So part of me always kind of wondered, well, is it because I like this stuff? And I always kind of questioned whether I had it or not because I also knew I wanted to have that ability. Like it's something I always envied in others. And
Hmm.
so throughout the different years, just kind of always having that interest, when I moved to Bellingham, I joined the group called Boo, Bellingham Observers of the Odd and Obscure, and that's where I met Sherry Mulholland.
Hmm.
And I just joined as an investigator. I had all the curiosities and wanted to get into it, and she started calling me one of her psychics.
Hmm.
And she saw something within me that I didn't fully quite see in myself at the time, but that I would say that's really where I first started to experience it and play around with it more, and just start to realize that I do have this ability.
Uh, so I'm very familiar with Sherry, and we've had her on here on our program a couple times. So, what defines psychic, define medium for our audience?
Yeah, so when I think of psychic, I really think of just what the word means, and to me, what the definition says of the soul. And so when I think of psychic, I think that's exactly what we're doing. We're doing soul work, we're doing energy work, and there's such a wide array of energy levels that can be experienced. And so that could be like reading the energy of another person, of energy of non-living or non-physical, up to like past lives and chakras and all such a wide variety of everything in between. Whereas I would say a psychic medium is more of a direct connection and conduit to a specific energy, that they kind of act as a channel, not necessarily as a channeler per se, but they have a very intentional connection, I would say, to something.
Could you give examples of each of those abilities that you experienced?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, immediately when I think of just psychic anything, I think of my training. I went through a good year and a half to 2 years of clairvoyance training at Simply Spirit Reading and Healing Center here in Bellingham. And unfortunately, it's no longer active. The owner closed it down during COVID. Um, Unfortunately, like so many places, but it was really the first time that I got to experience energy on a level of seeing it through visuals, I guess. And that's really through the clairvoyance part. So, like, if I read through clairvoyance, I'm really just kind of seeing images that I see in my mind versus like when I read with tarot, I actually have that image on the card and I can interpret that. So, it's pretty much doing the exact same thing, just in a different way. And, I mean, even through that class, I read so many people, and that was so good about it because it gave us so much practice. And you really get to learn your own style and what that kind of looks like for you. And I realized for me, as far as psychic abilities go, that I really have a strong sense of seeing. So the clairvoyance, being able to see it clearly in my mind, and that might look like images or moving or even movies. It could be like something flat. It could look 3D as well. It could even have more dimensions to it in my mind too. So it could have all these different layers to it, or it might just be a static image. Whereas I feel like when I'm kind of doing medium work, like when I read tarot, I often will encounter people's guides. And for me, that is more of like a voice I hear in my head, but it's over on this side. And so usually if I hear that kind of voice on this side, then I usually know that it's someone's guides coming through and I can explore that deeper with them or that connection.
So I used to joke with Sherry. We were talking about because I was a member of Boo at one point in time. We talk about what are the good things and what are the bad things about being in a ghost hunting group. And kind of we would joke the bad thing about being in a ghost hunting group is the group itself and all the all the different egos that you have to deal with. So talk about as a person who's been in a ghost hunting group, what are the different component parts of a ghost hunting group? How do you prove the existence of a ghost? Maybe that's the easiest way to talk about it.
Oh, I mean, that's a great question to begin with because I think even over the years, especially with getting back into the tours, I've had to question what is a ghost on many different levels for myself, especially if I'm going to talk about it to others. I really kind of wanted to make sure that my beliefs were very strong and solid in what I understood. And as far as like when a ghost or like if I'm looking into a ghost, I would say there's two questions that I primarily ask. One is this an intelligent energy that we're experiencing, or is this a residual energy? And what I found throughout the years is that I think we're experiencing a greater amount of residual energy on all sorts of different levels. I've even found that there can be conversations and kind of moments in time that are stuck as like an energy echo that can almost seem like it has intelligence, but it's more of like a play or a movie that got stuck in time. Whereas, like, I've had plenty of things that will actually interactively react with me and respond to me in real time, whereas that I would consider it has intelligence.
Yeah, I went a couple years ago for my birthday. I went to Gettysburg, and
Ooh.
oh yeah, oh it's right because there were I didn't have any experiences, but there were people who talked about. We interviewed one guy who lived back there, who essentially said when he was a kid, he was riding his bicycle on the battleground. He came around a corner, and all of a sudden, he smelled gunpowder, heard gunfire, and then found himself in a Civil War battle. And we were trying to kind of decide what was happening. Did he go back in time
Mm.
and experience that, or was he just experiencing some kind of residual energy? So, yeah, I think there
Yeah.
are a lot of those residual versus intelligent hauntings. Um, so tell me what else you try to do as a ghost hunting group to prove the existence of either an intelligent haunting or a residual haunting.
Yeah, when I joined Boo, one of my favorite ways of trying to gain evidence into all of this was using just a little digital voice recorder to get EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, and I found great success with that compared to using like digital photography or other kinds of mediums that you might use. And I seemed especially, and we can talk more about this later, of Sycamore Square in Bellingham. I'm sure you've been many
I've
times, or
been there,
especially
yeah,
if you've been with Boo,
yeah.
that I found it to be just a very active building, but it produced a lot of audio evidence for me. So that's where I kind of learned that that seemed to be my medium of at least where I seem to get the most evidence as far as ghosts are related. So for me, when I go into any investigation, for me, the audio component is extremely big. Nowadays, though, I'm really into using the Ovilus 5. I think Ghost Stop puts it out. and it's on all the big TV shows right now. But supposedly that one can pick up very small adjustments in the atmosphere that spirits can make and then translate those into words to make direct communication with us. And so I'm not going to lie, I was very, very skeptical about this device. I've had it for almost coming up on 2 years now. And probably for about the first year and a half, I never really got things that really seemed coincidental to where I was or to related to any sort of ghost or spirit that we were looking into. And so, what was it, back in May? I did a joint event with the Good Time Girls. They do the history tours here in town. And we brought that device along. And after they'll tell a story of either like a murder or a mystery that happened, and then we use the ghost hunting tools to try to get answers to possibly what has happened, so we can get a little more info about it. And after they told the story about a particular murder, we had on the Ovilus three names related to that particular story all come through. Now, it's
Hmm.
not unusual for the Ovilus to spit out all kinds of names. I've had it say all sorts of names before, but nothing that was ever that close or verifiable to anything. And so it in the whole evening, it only said four names, and to have three of them be directly main characters of a story,
Right.
to me, was absolutely wild.
Yeah.
And I've used it enough to know where it doesn't listen to me. It doesn't have any sort of Bluetooth or wireless capabilities, so it's not connected to my phone. We even had it off when we were telling that story as well. So there's no way that it could have picked up and kind of stored that information as it was being told. So I find that incredibly interesting.
So a couple of questions come to mind. That I've always been fascinated by electronic voice phenomena. And one of the things that fascinates me about that is this concept, I think the word is pareidolia,
Mm.
where the human mind tries to create a pattern of something. So how would you differentiate between EVP and this idea of the human mind just creating a certain structure for sounds? How do you tell the difference?
It's a good question, and I think you have to for me at least, I like to make sure that there's other people with me, so that way we can play it back and be like, "Did anyone else hear this?" And usually it's a good indication if everyone is like, "No, for sure, we did not recognize that," then you
Mhm.
know it's an EVP. But there's so many times I recognized this when I was looking through all my EVPs to play for the ghost tours because I wanted to pick out a bunch that I hadn't used. And I had to kick out probably about 25% of my old ones because I think they were just very natural noises that I wanted to hear ghosts in at the
Hmm.
time.
Mhm.
But listening all these years later, I think it was like the sound of fabric moving or like jacket swishing or
Mm,
all sorts of normal things that I did want to believe that were EVPs years ago.
mm. Yeah, I would think that would be something that you'd have to pay attention to. So maybe even a more basic question, Chuck. How does somebody become a ghost? Or why does somebody become a ghost in passing and then someone who also passes is not a ghost? I've
Yeah.
always
Well,
wondered about that.
that's actually one of the questions I had to ponder before I started my tours, and kind of really nail down an understanding for myself. And I think on the majority scale that our soul is meant to move on. It's meant to go beyond this life and it's meant to learn about this life. And I think we do reincarnate into another life. Because otherwise, I think the one and done life is kind of like, well, what's the point? I kind of feel like we need a longer progression to like play out these karmic lessons or whatever. But I think that as a soul grows, like it needs needs a little bit more heft to it behind it. Um, but I think when a person dies, I think the majority do pass on. But of course, then we do see connection to those spirits, especially through mediumship and even through I would say some of the most common ghost stories I get are our loved ones coming to visit us. And I
Mhm.
find those to be the most genuine stories that I hear over and over and over again. And some of them can be extremely weird, but they still feel very genuine. And I think that that's very much a connection where even if a soul does move on, we still have access to them and we still can connect in with them. But then I think in the times where people have said like they're stuck souls on Earth, to
Mhm.
me, when I've looked into that, it feels more like the soul is kind of stuck in a fever dream, where it almost kind of feels like in an anxiety dream, where they're kind of stuck in this mental loop. And sometimes they just kind of need a little bit of redirection or someone to kind of shake them awake and be like, no, this isn't where you're supposed to be, and you can move on. And I think there are some that do intentionally stay behind, but I do think that that's part of their growth as well, and in resisting that bigger growth change as well. And then I think that there's such a wide array of energy echoes that just get left behind by the living. And I even think the living sometimes haunt the living as well, that you don't necessarily need someone to pass on to have their energy encountered in a space.
Talk about that a little bit. That's kind of interesting.
I think what really kind of first made me think about this was I lived near Western here in Bellingham, so near the university. And I mean, already you have student housing, all these apartments where people are coming and going year after year, all sorts of parties, all sorts of energies, emotional energies with everything that everyone's going through. And so I think that even on that level, that we as living can leave behind, let's say if I'm used to walking down a certain hallway, there was a time in my apartment over there where I remembered I felt a very, very clear presence and breeze walk right at me and past me, and I was
Hmm.
the only one home, and we had never had anything happen. Like there was nothing that should have made that space haunted. Um, and there were other things too, where my roommate had a cat, and we had also experienced things that seemed to be like of a cat-like entity. And for a while, I thought, well, maybe it was a ghost cat coming to play with our cat. But then the more I
Mhm.
thought about it in years past, I almost just kind of felt like it was more of residual us and just kind of our everyday lives and even the cat's life that we kind of interacted with. Like to me, the energy felt very hollow. It didn't feel like a presence to it. And that's why I think there's such just a wider range of energy from what we leave behind to even the ghost stuff. But I think it all kind of gets lumped into one big category of all just ghost. So,
Mhm. Another kind of fascinating issue would be why some people can experience ghosts and some people who are in the same space don't experience the ghost. And I think there's a famous picture in England where two people were photographing a spirit that was moving down a stairway, and one of the people saw the spirit, but the other person didn't.
hmm.
What kind of explanation might there be for something like that? If there
I
is an
think
explanation.
I think if it's a conscious energy, if it has intelligence to it, I think they pick and choose who they want to communicate with.
Ah,
And I think that they do recognize people that easier or that have this connection a little bit easier to them. And I think that they will reach out to them over someone who doesn't necessarily have that.
okay. And that would explain one person seeing it versus another person not seeing it. Interesting.
But I think also you got to keep in mind our own personal filters as well, because if you're naturally closed off to those things, you might, I don't know. They always kind of say that old example of when Columbus's ships were approaching the islands, that they didn't
Right.
recognize them as ships because they
Because
didn't
they've
know what
never
it
seen
was.
it. Yeah.
Correct. And so I almost kind of wonder if that's a whole factor too, because for those that do believe, I feel like we do have experiences a lot easier than those who are not open to it. So
Now I'm trying to remember where this was in Bellingham. Is there something called the Buffalo Club or
the wild buffalo,
yeah, Wild Buffalo? That's it.
yeah.
So we went in there to do an investigation because some of the bands that were performing in the Wild Buffalo were complaining about certain paranormal things happening while they were in the building. And what was
Okay.
interesting was their break room was right next to this room that had a ton of electromagnetic energy in
Mm,
it caused by um, just all kinds of electronic gizmos. And what we kind of came up with the feeling was that maybe that was an explanation for setting off, for instance, K2 meters that would measure electromagnetic fields. That was the reason that all those meters were being set off. Ever come across anything like that?
Oh yeah. I think there's so many natural explanations that we have around us as well that might think that we're experiencing something paranormal. And unfortunately, high EMF is one. And I think psychic people are very sensitive to magnetic fields to begin with. And I think that that's kind of how we pick up on things because we're picking up on the information in the field. And so to me, it makes sense that they would also feel very sensitive to very strong electronic signals. And I would say for sure 100% that I've seen people in my ghost hunting experience talk to the signals of cell phones or electricity on a K2 meter, thinking that they're experiencing something paranormal.
Mhm.
So if you're going to use those things, you just have to be very, very clear. And honestly, that was my biggest fear of the Ovilus when I got that device, that it was just going to be a very fancy EMF meter. Um, Luckily, I live near some power lines, and I took the K2 up there one time just to see the range of the power that it was putting out. And sure enough, when you're under there, it lit up to the red immediately. And so I was like, okay, this very much accurately responds and reflects the electronic signal. So I took the Ovilus up there, and it did not pop off like I would have expected it to if it was just an EMF device. So I think that's just another little thing that I tried at least to give it a little more credence of that there is something more that this device is picking up on, which is good. So,
So, what other kind of gadgets would you have if you're going
yeah.
to conduct a ghost hunt?
I also really like using the Spirit box, the box that scans the radio stations at a very
Uh,
frequent rate. So that way, supposedly, the ghost can come through and use that white noise and actually talk to us in lifetime. And while I have not had immense success with that device, it still fascinates me. But there are times where I feel like I really have had like single words come through that were relevant to what was going on, what we were talking about.
I guess I always thought, and I haven't used one of those, but I often thought that that would be a circumstance where you'd more likely get pareidolia because you're kind of interpreting what's coming through on the radio. What would you
And
say to that?
Well, and that's something I have seen as well, especially if it has a slower scan rate where a lot of that radio noise does come through. There are so many times where I've recognized things as regular radio noise, but then people will be like, oh no, it said this. I'm like, wait, hold up. That was actual radio noise. We got to back it up. And I prefer if I use that device, I want it to scan so rapidly where none of that stuff is going to come through. And I really like, again, if you get a single word or not, you have to question it. But if you get like a whole phrase that comes through, it definitely makes you wonder because nothing should that intelligent be coming through that many radio stations, especially if you have it on a high scanning rate. So, I mean, I think it's a combination of both. I think it's a very genuine possibility that stuff can come through, but I think there's a lot of times people mistake it for very regular energy signals or radio signals.
Well, and that's why I thought it was important if you do a ghost investigation to have somebody like you who's a psychic medium, plus all this electronic stuff that could be, indicating that there's some kind of energy there. Because maybe between both of those things, you'd have a better idea than rather using one of those things that you might actually be dealing with the spirit. What would you say to that?
Yeah, honestly, I think the more perspectives and tools that you do have, the better, especially because then you can corroborate stuff, or even if you have psychics maybe write down their impressions and then reveal them at the very end after they've had everything happen. I think it's just there's all sorts of different ways that you can bring in the different possibilities of stuff. But also, I think if you bring in lots of the tools, you have to have tools that you trust, just like you have to bring people that you trust too. Um, I don't know if it was your experience, but we saw a lot of people come and go and boo, and some were there for a very short time because of what they would share and how they would share things with people. And you got to keep that in mind that people can be just as weird as ghosts. So,
Well, I'll tell you an example of that. Um,
yeah,
I'm not going to use names, but there
yeah,
was a
yeah.
guy who joined Boo who said that he worked for uh, the Whatcom County Sheriffs. And we were in the Sycamore building one night, and there were some people outside were making a lot of noise. So he went outside and said, "Hey, I'm so and so. I'm with the Whatcom County Sheriff. If you don't leave, we're gonna have to do something about this." Well, later on, Sherry and I both discovered that this guy was not with the
Ugh.
Whatcom County Sheriffs, but he was just using that to play out whatever psychological issues he was dealing with. But that was an example of kind of the weird factor of, how ghost hunting groups can draw people in that might have not the best of motives.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember there was one guy that he started telling one of our clients we were actually in a home to investigate, and this gentleman that I think he'd only been out with us maybe one or two times. He started telling this client that he had demons attached to him and that that he needed to start wearing black onyx and just
Oh
all
my
this
gosh.
other stuff that just escalated everything more than we needed.
Right.
And of course, we had to tell this other guy to get out of here, and we had to calm down the resident, and it just made a mess. And so, I'm very very cautious nowadays about who I do ghost hunt with, because
Uh,
I want it to be as genuine as possible.
right. Going back to the comment about the worst thing about a ghost hunting group is the group itself.
Yeah.
I think there's an example of that. So tell us any other equipment that you would bring to bear in a ghost hunt besides what we've already talked about.
For something really simple, I really like the dowsing rods.
Dowsing
That can
rods.
also can be a very touchy instrument because they can be very sensitive in how they move. But I think it's just a very interesting and simple tool to use to see where energies do happen, and you can even use them for response as well. So I think it's just a very good, easy, simple tool that you don't have to spend several of $100
Right.
on. And you don't have to spend a lot of money if you want to ghost hunt. You can do it all very simply if you want to. So,
I know some people that have ghost hunting apps on their cell phones, and I often wondered if they're any good or
so
they just
those I'm way more skeptical about. There's only one ghost hunting app that I found so far that I like. It's kind of got this multi-tool, and it even has an SLS feature with it. That's the one where it shows little stick figures.
okay.
Typically, it's used from an Xbox camera and attached to a tablet, and that's very very popular in all the Go shows. But I have found that at least this app does not give false positives of like just showing stick figures there. Because if I had an app that did that quite a bit, I would suspect whether the app is genuine or not. And at least for this app, I have not gotten any sort of false positives, or anything that it has picked up has been real people, real objects. So I think if I do get a hit on that, it will be genuine, that it's really picking something up. But there are so many like the Ovilus box type style apps out there that have specific word banks of related to ghosts, related to hauntings, related to things to make it seem more scary and intense. So there's a lot of them I absolutely do not trust.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us some stories about haunted Bellingham. And I know some of the places you mentioned, the Sycamore building. I spent quite a bit of
Yeah.
time in that building. Just and maybe you can include some of the places that you include on your uh, ghost tour.
Yeah, I would say two of my favorite spots from Fairhaven. So for those that don't know, Bellingham was composed of multiple little towns that all came together to become Bellingham. So Fairhaven is kind of like our second downtown in a way. But it was its own town at one point, so that's why it's kind of weirdly spread out that way. And Fairhaven holds Sycamore Square, which we talked about earlier. I find that to be the most active building I've ever consistently investigated. There's also Colophon Cafe in Fairhaven as well, and that is part of the Knights of Pythias building, and that's the basement level. And from what I understand, that actually used to be an old morgue.
Uh-huh.
So definitely has had a lot of death in there. And I would say that probably rivals Sycamore Square as far as active ghost stories that I hear on a regular basis. So the
And I
staff
don't
there.
know, I don't know why I'm remembering this, but it seemed like that there was a Mexican restaurant in Fairhaven that also had a reputation being haunted. Am I
Yeah,
remembering that right?
you are remembering that correctly. So that was pretty much when it was Dos Padres. It's now
Yeah.
called El Agave, and
Okay.
I've tried to ask the owners just about their happenings ever since they took over. They've been pretty quiet about it, so I pretty much just refer to it as the Dos Padres ghost. But of course, just new ownership does not make energies leave just that easy.
Right.
So I think that there are still things being experienced. Just they're a lot more quiet about it. But I do talk about that building on the tour as well. Yeah.
You know, I also do UFO investigations for the National UFO Reporting Center. And one of the things I find is that there are people who, if they see a UFO, they won't tell anybody that they saw it because
Yeah.
they'll think there's a stigma attached to that. Well, maybe that's kind of what you're dealing with these people that have the spirit activity in the Mexican restaurant.
Yeah. And you got to keep in mind too that ghosts themselves hold different power in different cultures as well. And so that I definitely find that at least with more of the Latin cultures, that there's a bigger fear around ghosts than
Really?
say American culture. I even see that with Japan as well, that as a whole, Japan is very, very scared of ghosts and those types of stories. And so a lot of people don't even like to hear them because they do very much make people afraid. So even cultural levels have a whole different meaning to what ghosts are as well, which we
Yeah,
got to
that's
keep in mind.
interesting.
Yeah,
Let's see, I was trying to think of some other places. Is the Black Cat still in operation in
it
Sycamore Square?
is. It is
Uh,
indeed. I have not heard a lot of stories coming out of there recently, other than kind of little things that the staff will experience here and there, but very much still operational and still in Sycamore Square, which is good. And
Tell
let's
us
see.
about tell us about some other places you've investigated, or just some
Yeah,
other stories.
Yeah, I really enjoyed checking out the Mount Baker Theater in downtown Bellingham. That was a
Right.
very, very cool place. And while I had kind of little experience on a lot of the meters, I would say some things that were interesting. I did get one EVP that came through. If you want to hear that, that's on my podcast, Hey Ghost Hey. And it almost kind of sounds like a growl.
Hmm.
Some kind of weird. I can't even really describe it, but it doesn't really sound like a human noise per se. And what's interesting there is that they also have a story of a ghost panther. And so, of
Huh?
course, a lot of people are like, well, is it the panther? And I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
know. Well, because even like human voices will sound distorted on a recording. So I kind of wonder if a cat voice is going to come through, if it will be equally as distorted. But I don't know. It doesn't really feel like animal growl to me, but we got something. And we did have one of the names of a woman who passed away in the 70s, I do believe, of heart conditions. Her name came throughout the space several times with us on the Ovilus, which was
Hmm.
interesting.
I remember one of the investigations that I was privy to with Sherry was there was a family in Bellingham that might have been associated with Whatcom Community College, meaning they were students there,
Yeah.
and they would get really weird phone calls. And
Oh.
one of the phone calls was a growling sound, a very animalistic sound, and we were joking that maybe if you're getting those kind of phone calls, you need to change your phone number or something. But Sherry seemed to think that that was maybe an elemental that she was
Oh.
dealing with. What do you have you ever experienced anything like that?
I mean not like that exactly as far as evidence goes, but I think I did have an encounter with something elemental. It didn't feel demonic. It didn't quite feel human either to me. It just felt like something else.
Hmm.
And we had investigated a home in Cedro Woolley, and I had gone down there twice. The second time I'd gone down there with Sherry and Elena, And as we came back, I felt like it was attached to me. Like I just felt this very heaviness. I guess it's really kind of hard to describe, but I felt really uneasy. I just felt kind of icky overall.
Hmm.
And they even said as soon as they dropped me off, they said the air in the van cleared immediately, and they felt fine. They're like, "Yep, something was
Really?
attached to you."
Oh gosh.
And yeah, it took until the next day for it to actually go away.
Hmm. Gosh. Interesting. Very interesting. Can you
Yeah.
share any other? Well, so where do you go on the tour? If you come to Bellingham and do the tour, where do you take people who go on the tour?
Yeah, so I've got two tours right now, one of Fairhaven, one of downtown. Fairhaven, we start and end at Sycamore Square, and then we go down Harris Street to the Village Green, and then just back up Harris back to Sycamore. And then for downtown, we start and end at Chuckanut Bay Distillery. So probably newer since your time here. And I don't even remember what it was. I think maybe it was even a cannabis dispensary down on the first level there for a while. But
Yeah, I don't remember. It's been a while ago.
that, or maybe I'm thinking of somewhere else, but it was the old J.C. Penney of Bellingham. So we start
Oh,
and end at that location, and we stop by the Hotel Leo, which also has activity, the Mount Baker Theater, and stop by the Spark Museum and a few other little areas too. So
okay. So what does the tour cost? Just for somebody who might be interested in taking it, and where can you get tickets?
yeah, all the main tours are $25 a person. And if you go on the downtown tour, that has an optional drink at the end, which is additional. And if you want to get tickets, you can just go to BellinghamGhostTours.com.
Okay. Right. So I think I told you I might be up in Bellingham in the fall. So maybe I'll
Yeah.
see
Oh,
you on
please let
one
me
of those
know.
tours.
You are
Yeah.
welcome anytime. Also, I've
Yeah.
got some possible UFO pictures I'd love to send you as well, or at least
Oh,
for to have you check out. So,
send them away. I see all kinds of weird UFO pictures. So anything else we ought to talk about in terms of ghosts and haunting and what you're doing in Bellingham? Any other stories?
um, I'm super fascinated about our nature spaces being haunted and having encounters in nature. So I think that's kind of be one of my next big focuses. Like I've been very, very curious about the Mosquito Lake Road area out in the county, if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
I want to say it's off of Route 9, and even Route 9 in Acme has its own story about a woman that's being seen walking in 1800s period clothing in snowstorms
Wow.
in the middle of the
Wow.
night. So it just seems like a very, very active area. So I'm super curious within like the county and with our forests and our nature and all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff and what's going on.
Well, one of the things that well, I don't know if she turned me onto it or I turned her onto it. Bigfoot, because there are a lot of Sasquatch. Sherry, while I was in Bellingham, had three sightings of Sasquatch, and I
Wow.
spent I don't know how much time on the Lummi Reservation looking for Bigfoot and didn't see diddly. So
Yeah.
there are, when you said nature, that's the first thing I thought about. So maybe you should get into Sasquatch researching too.
Man, I don't know if I have the heart to go out into the woods in the middle of the night. Like I think I'm too afraid of cougars and bears and
Well,
all
yeah,
the natural
lions.
stuff out there.
Yeah, I think lions and tigers and bears and humans are probably
And
worse.
humans,
Yeah,
absolutely.
worse than anything else. Well, Chuck, I want to thank you for spending some time with us today, and I'll try to hook up with you when I come to Bellingham. And if other people who are listening to our podcast, we always ask on our YouTube channel, we always ask people to like and subscribe. Maybe you'll get some other people who'll come your way. But thanks a whole lot for being on Anomalies today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was good fun.
Yeah, okay. We'll like do this again sometime.
I would love to.
Okay, let's see if I can end this now. Yeah, there you go. Bye, Chuck.
All right, thanks, Dan.